crawling through the airport. So if I fall down, these guys are going to pick me up and pull me up for the rest of the lecture. Can you hear me?
Please put up the mic.
I'm trying. Better?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not used to this kind of stuff. All right, so this is kind of a story of my 47. This is my 47th year of coaching, so it's kind of an autobiography, if you will. And I grew up in Ohio on a dairy farm where I milked cows and shoveled shit, and was just dreaming how to get off the farm. I grew up in the 60s where you played whatever sport was in season. So I played American football, basketball, I wrestled, I played ice hockey, I ran track and field and played baseball. I was a high school teacher, and I taught all the sciences: chemistry, physics, electronics, biology, things like that. So I've been a neo-generalist my whole life. My father was in construction, so you had to know bricklaying and carpentry and roofing and all of that. So my entire life's kind of been guided to be a generalist. I've coached Olympians or World Championship qualifiers in every event from marathon to 100, all the throws, all the jumps. So I came from an era of no budget and no help. So I had to learn to wear a lot of hats. So currently I go around the world and I audit coaches and performance staffs and institutions, federations, Olympic committees, Premier League football, Winter Olympic sports, MMA, fighting. I work with special forces, military, special operators. And so from these audits, I end up mentoring a lot of people. So I mentor a lot of coaches and sports therapists. And from this mentorship, I end up being the gatekeeper, the bad guy that kind of enforces the ideas and the principles. So as I said, this is kind of an autobiography. Guys that really influenced my development on the left: Clausewitz, Art of War, Prussian General. In coaching, if you don't know logistics and contingencies and tactics and strategies, you're going to lose. And the number one thing I took away from him is to have plan B and plan C. Life seldom goes to plan A. How many of us have written tremendous annual plans and 2 weeks into the training, kaput? So how do we adapt? Contingency. The guy in the top middle, Tom Tellez, was my mentor. He's a coach at Carl Lewis. So my graduate studies in university were under him. Guy on the right, James Oshman, energy medicine. So the frontier in sports medicine, I think, is in fashion, in collagen matrix, and he was a pioneer in this. Einstein, I was a physicist, so obviously he was an influence. Jean Piaget, the Swiss developmental psychologist. Coaching is most of the work that we do is development. So if you don't understand the history of developmental psychology, then how are you working? William James was an author, pedagogist, the art of teaching, and then Victor Lopez from Puerto Rico was a mentor on how to deal with people in very difficult places, third world countries. And here in Sweden, probably my biggest mentor was a guy I call the flower man, Bjorn Bloomberg. Thought he'd be here, but he's in Tallinn at a shot with a conference. So the guy's 70 years old, still going to conferences, and that tells you something. So for me, high performance is really a puzzle. It's got science, it's got art, you build networks of expertise, you build experiences, and hopefully you come up with a sweet spot on how to operate and how to coach. So it's truly a balancing act between art and science. The teaching part, the programming part can be artistry, but it's founded on the tools of science. Super important you build networks, layers of networks, not just in your event area, but in all disciplines. And you know, there's no school like experience. You have to get dirty, you have to fail. And in programming, programs are really a hypothesis. You come up with some ideas, you implement it, you collect data, you analyze it, and at the end you decide to keep it, change it, or go another way. And the only way to do that is practically through experience. So most of my work has been in schools and universities or third world countries, no budget, no staff. So I'm always hearing this, well, you worked in the UK, you had unlimited budget, you worked at the US Training Center, you had all these resources. Most of my work, I had very little staff and no support, so you have to build networks to help you get the job done. And most of my work's been in track and field, but as I said, I work in a lot of different disciplines. And the beauty of our sport is there's no place to hide. When that athlete goes into the arena where it's the Olympics and there's billions of people watching on TV, if the athlete succeeds, it's because of the athlete. And if the athlete fails, it's because of the coach. You know that. So there's no place to hide. In a lot of sports, like soccer, football, ice hockey, you can blame your teammates or various coaches, but in track, it's that coach-athlete that all ends up back at our doorstep. This is my office. My wife's never happy about it, but I think record keeping is super important. If you don't measure it, then how do you know if it worked or not? And with spreadsheets and computers and phones and voice and Siri, like there's no excuse to not have good record keeping skills. So, as I said, I'm kind of a holistic person, generalist. I wear a lot of hats, universalist. In my program, we use mechanical driven model. So things don't change unless the mechanics are close to the model. So if we implement a new idea or a new training cycle, we don't move forward until that athlete shows some degree of mastery. And it's based on the technical model. So these are some of the big ticket items that we look through a perceptual grid on how the programming is affecting the athlete. What's happening to their biochemistry, their central nervous system, these fascial trains that we're talking about. Is everybody familiar with fascia? Okay, if you take chicken, what's Swedish for chicken? Yeah, close. And you pull the skin off, you see a sheen still on the muscle. That sheen is fascia. Fascia wraps around organs and myofibrils and all that. It's made of collagen, and it's hygroscopic. It's filled with water. And it really controls movement and movement expression. And I think we're a little too wrapped up in just the muscle and what it's doing. So fascia is part of a network called the ECM, the extracellular matrix. And that's, in my mind, the new frontier. So this collagen matrix, how the fascia, tendons, ligaments, bursas, fat pads, how those talk to one another and how they control movement and movement expression. Those are the touchstones of how we deal with training. How many people have heard of marginal gains? The 1%, you know, we're going to have special pillows or a special diet or a top secret training plan. So I'm more concerned with the essentials and the fundamentals. You know, we use the term in Texas, what are the big rocks? What are the KPIs, the key performance indicators, the things that you really need to address and monitor and manipulate? I think if you identify these, you get layers of KPI systems. So a thing that's critical in a developing athlete first couple of years may reduce in power as they age. So things that we do with 14-year-old athletes may not have a place with a 25-year-old Olympian, and vice versa. I think the mistake I see with youth is we're training youth like they're elite athletes. They don't have movement literacy and fundamental sport literacy, and we're doing very complex, very advanced training with them. And I think a lot of the injuries and the burnout that we're seeing in kids today are coming from those factors. And we have to monitor these essentials and fundamentals in order to rank them in a hierarchy. So in the fall, you know, it may be acceleration development and a little bit of introductory to speed, but you can't do special speed endurance until they get a certain mastery of those qualities. So the ranking of what you do, how much you do it, when to do it, is critical. But it's a balancing act, and these KPIs are fluid. So what's number 5 may become number 1 in season, and what's number 1 may become number 10 later in the season or later in an athlete's career. Is that making sense? Am I speaking slow enough? I know. Yeah. Otherwise, my Swedish, we'd be here all day. So we use template designs with prescriptive implementation. So if we write a workout, say we're going to do a speed workout, we may say 4 to 6 runs over 40 to 60 meters at 88 to 95%. That gives us wiggle room on those parameters. So that's what I mean, a template, and then we prescribe, kind of like a pharmacist, after we see the warm-up or as we're going through the workout, do we need to adjust this? So if I've got a person that's feeling a little bit ill or they're coming off an injury, I'm going to use the lower numbers. I might use 4 times 40 meters, and I may use a little longer rest and intervene with therapy during the workout. Where if it's a beautiful day, Swedish summer, 15 degrees, not raining. I've spent a lot of years in Sweden, so I know spend summer real well. Maybe we do 6 runs over 60 meters with a unique work to rest ratio. So that's what I mean about templates. I think too many times we write a rigid program, and then if the athlete can't do it, the coach is upset, the athlete's upset, and it really wasn't practical. We probably overguessed. So that's why we know there's a basement. We got to do a certain number to address the issue, and we know there's a ceiling. If we go over that number, it doesn't work. We're not really training what we're saying. So in our experience with world-class sprinters, they can do about 6 to 8 high-speed runs. And after 8, it falls apart. They either slow down or the mechanics get dangerous. So our ceiling's 6 to 8. And we know from biochemical assays, they need at least 4 runs to trigger the right chemistry. So that's our basement. So that's our spectrum, if you will, or our template. And our job as a coach is to study the workout, study the warm-up, and prescribe precisely what is the right dosage today. So the dosage you use on Wednesday this week may be different from Wednesday next week. I think power speed sports have a lot of commonalities. People say, well, how can you work in all these disciplines? The essentials are the essentials. If you're accelerating or changing direction in a field court sport, the physics principles are the same. So if you learn the big rocks, the essentials, the fundamentals, you can coach a lot of event disciplines. And through coaching a lot of event disciplines, you may find answers and solutions to the specialty event that your heart has a passion for. And wellness factors become more prevalent in training designs. So our number 1 first objective is do no harm. It's the Hippocratic Oath. So if we're in doubt, we're always going to default to a little bit safer. And that goes against the grain with a lot of modern things like, I got to work harder than my opponent. I got to work more. I've got to work more hours, more days, more weeks. You know, in the UK, people brag about training on Christmas. Oh, got my Christmas workout on. Yeah. Like, if you miss one day, I don't think it's a game changer. You know, how many people at the end of the season give 2 weeks off to their athletes? 3. A month. Right? Because this athlete needs to recover, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically and perhaps spiritually. So that's another art, how much time to give off. Do you give off after indoors, before outdoors? How many people give 2 to 3 weeks off after the indoor season? And what is off? Is it recreation? Is it go to the Swedish mountains and live in a tent? get in a kayak and go around the islands? You know, what's off? How do we define off? So most concepts, most ideas, most principles are, in my mind, spectral and fractal. So this photo on the right is fractal geometry. Coaches and master coaches are good at seeing patterns and trends. So if we collect data, we're not just looking for linear equations or correlation coefficients. We're looking for patterns, for trends. And most ideas are spectrum. If on the left of the spectrum is, I feel 100%, I'm super, I'm happy, and on the right it's like, I need to go to the hospital like I am currently. Somewhere on that spectrum, that athlete exists, or a concept exists. So I struggle with absolutist in this era of social media. It's very polemic, it's black and white, you know, it's camps. I'm in this camp, I'm in that camp. When in reality, biology is complex systems. So it's really layers and patterns of matrices operating in the athlete. So as it said, network driven in all areas. So I have sport radiologists around the world. If I get an MRI and it has weird pictures, then we'll send it off to these people and get second opinions, third opinions, and look for a consensus. You know, you have a therapist. You know, we have therapists that have certain specialties. Sports scientists, physiologists. I have physiologists that are really good with endurance, but I have other physiologists that are better with speed. Because your interest drives your expertise. So if you don't take anything else away from this talk this morning, learn to build networks, vast networks. And you don't always have to spend money to build networks. So when I was a high school coach, I trained the dentist's daughter in order for the dentist to work on my athlete's teeth. There was a good massage therapist, and so I trained her husband so that this massage therapist would work. We call it horse trading in Texas. Do they have that term in Sweden? Yeah. So, good coaches are good horse traders. All right? Because the number one thing I hear in audiences like this, you don't understand, I have no budget, we don't have sponsors, you know, we're struggling. Build networks. There's ways. So for me, sport is a never-ending search for how to manage things, how to organize things. So this morning I woke up and I had 137 emails. You know, I hadn't been online for 24 hours. So you can see my inbox today is pretty full. And my outbox is empty. I haven't gotten started yet. How do we manage that? It's easy with these phones and iPads and computers to get distracted, to lose the plot. So ergonomics, we'll go into science. Erg is the unit of work. So ergonomics is a study of how people work. And so we're constantly looking at how the athlete's working, not only in practice or in the training things, but in life. Because work is work. And we use the term, we have batteries in the body. So we have emotional batteries, we have cognitive batteries, we have ATP batteries, we have lactate batteries. There's multiple batteries. And as you know from your cell phones and laptops and your iPads, if one battery is down and draining, it starts draining the other batteries if they're all interconnected. So sometimes the physiology may say the athlete's recovered, but if life stressors are incredibly high, those batteries are still getting drained. If you go to a low-key competition versus FinCampa, there's a different drainage on the battery. Although the fins aren't doing so good anymore, so maybe it doesn't cost the battery very much. So as I said, I work in special forces, so I work a lot with soldiers who have IED injuries, so the bombs go off and they have brain injuries, and we have to teach them how to walk again. So this is some data off movement strategies, movement signatures. How do people move? And so there's hip joint, knee joint, ankle joint, toe height swing, how these things interface. And people are always saying, well, is there really a technical model? Folks, there's one way to walk. There isn't 1,000 different ways to walk. If you look at those curves, red being the injured leg, blue being the compensation leg, and black being our goal, our model. Even when they're very injured, they're close to the model. And we call that movement signatures. So as I said earlier, we work on a mechanical efficiency paradigm, if you will, and we want athletes as close to movement signatures as possible. There's bandwidth, there's variation, but if they get outside that bandwidth, they're less efficient and they're more prone to injury. And the further you're out of the bandwidth, the worse the injury potential. So athletes have a lot of things to do, so we try to come up with components that tick a lot of boxes. So can we develop an exercise in the weight room that replaces 5 exercises, for example? So an Olympic lift, for example, can cover maybe 20 different exercises. So in my group, we do Olympic lifting. So do we design things that tick a lot of boxes, or do we have a menu item that's 50 pages? So when I was a young coach, I tried to impress everybody, and our daily workout plan was 3 pages long. And now I could write it on a matchbook. Maybe that's experience. So obviously, being a scientist, we embrace all of the sports sciences. So we use this as a grid. So when I mentor young coaches and institutions, I'm constantly looking how they're utilizing these resources. And you don't have to take crazy notes, because I'll send this slide deck to Anders, and then Anders can forward it email. But you need to ask yourself periodically, do a debrief, like maybe every month. How are we doing on these various spheres of influence? Am I developing networks in these areas? So pedagogy, the art of teaching, the science of teaching, and motor control, these are super important tenets for us. And I think the art of teaching is a dying art. I don't know how it is in Sweden, but in the US, we no longer have teaching colleges. You become a specialist, and then they just hope you can learn how to teach. So if you want to be a history teacher right now in the United States, you have to get a master's degree in history, and then they just throw you in the classroom and say, teach. It's crazy, but it's modern times. So what are you doing to improve yourself and understand pedagogy, the art of teaching? And in motor control, how we control movement, you know, what do you know about motor control and motor learning? So our program, it's kind of like Linux. You know, we have all these networks and experts, and even the athlete. It's a collaboration. It's not top down. I'm not the general and my athletes are the soldiers. It's in special forces, when a squad of 10 come in after a battle, they put their rank on the wall and they go in and have a meeting. It's very horizontal. It's collaborative. So we'll do a little survey. How do we coach and plan and rehab? So all of us go through these various spheres of influence, and even as we're experienced, we still bounce around in these areas. The takeaway is, don't get stuck in one area. Right? So hopefully in your event discipline, you know the fundamentals and the essentials. So if you're a long jump coach, you understand there's an approach, and the approach has components, and you have a preparation to take off, and you have to take off, and you do things in the air, and then you do things on the landing. So you know the fundamentals and essentials. So how do we go next level? How do we teach it? How do we write programs? Well, hopefully we do some research on some ideas. And the Honor showed me the books that they've created, tremendous resource. I wish I'd had that when I was a young coach. But how do a lot of us, especially the younger coaches, do research now? You get on your phone and you're on Twitter and you see a study and you go, oh, I like that title. And then you look at the author and you go, oh, I've heard of him. And then you go to the abstract and you kind of read the general idea and you're going, yeah, that's me. And we skip through the data and the graphs and all of that because we want to see the conclusion. And then we've got it. Well, that's not really research. Current trends. The old guys in the room, we've seen a lot of magic bullets, parachutes, Swiss ball training, Nautilus machines. Be careful if it's modern and flashy, be careful. There's a reason science demands longitudinal studies, study things over a long period of time. Experiences. My track coach was a basketball coach in high school. And he only did track and field because to get the basketball job, he had to coach 2 sports. So he was conscientious. He went to the school library to look up some books on track and field. And the only books in our school library were on distance training. There were 3 books. It was a farm school. It was a small squad. We had 11 boys. We had a shot putter, a discus thrower. I was a pole vaulter. We had a long jumper, we had a high jumper, we had a sprinter, we had a hurdler, and a couple distance runners. So the first day of practice, we come out, and the coach says, thanks for coming out, and we're going to do a magic workout. I've been studying these books, and every book, this workout's in there, so it must be magic. And we're young guys, we want to please the coach. Yeah, coach, what is it? 10 times 400 meters. So my shot put friend looks at me and he goes, are you serious? And my high jump friend that runs 10 steps goes, what? So the second day we come back out and we're like, okay, it's got to get better. And the coach says, magic workout time. And we're like, and what is it? He goes, 10 400s. We did 10 400s every day of the week, all season long, even the day before competition. I don't know if anybody's ever pole vaulted in this room, but pole vaulting after 10 400s is not fun. So I knew from experience not to trust how I was coached. Because let's be honest, if we're stuck and we're not sure, we coach how we were coached. We default to how we were coached. Or how we were mentored. Luckily, I had a great mentor in Tom Tellez. Under pressure, or when in doubt, we default to how we were coached or taught. And that may not be a good thing. So eventually we synthesize a lot of this. We develop a philosophy. We have biases, and that's why you want a network of people and accountability so that people keep reminding you may be biased. So we went through a period, like in sprinting, where there was a bias for getting big and huge and super strong. And that doesn't work for every type of athlete. We've went through this bias of more mileage in distance running. We have people in the U.S. running 200 miles a week because more is better. And the injury rates are off the chart. So these peer influences kind of serve as an audit. So if you're coaching in isolation, I'd encourage you to develop a network for no other reason that people audit you and talk to you and help you identify biases or maybe dead ends. Cut and paste. Anybody ever cut and paste a menu item or a training plan? Do you know what I mean by like copy and paste on a computer? So when I was a young coach, one of my first tasks was jumping. And in the 70s, the countries doing well in jumping were the USSR, the Russians, the GDR, the Cubans, and some West Coast Americans. So I was a high school coach. On Monday, we did the Russian workouts. On Tuesday, we did the East German workouts. On Wednesday, we did the Cuban workouts. And on Thursday, we did the US workouts. And on Friday, everybody was injured. So I learned pretty early that cut and paste wasn't always the answer either. So in the end, here in the right corner, programming is really a big experiment. We come up with a hypothesis, a training plan. We implement it, we collect data off that training plan, we analyze it, and then we either keep it, the hypothesis, or slightly tweak it, or we throw it away. I stand before you with way more failed programs than successful programs. So I've coached probably 75 Olympians and probably 10 of them medalists, but I've coached 10,000 athletes. It's not a very good ratio. Is it? No. So it's an experiment. But if truth be told, in science, most experiments fail. But they don't publish those. In the journals, you only see the ones that they've either corrupted by paying somebody or they've manipulated the data so that it did work. In truth, in science, if you're a scientist, you fail 90% of the time. So why should we be any different? But if we don't have peers and audits and all of that, how do we know if we're failing? Results can lie. We have coaches in America that are considered very successful, and their programming is shit. But they can identify talent, and they can develop that talent for a year or two, and then the talent blows up, and they just get the next talent. But they look successful. Success for me and a coach is, what do you do over time with a diverse population? Is your 14-year-olds as good as your 25-year-olds? Do people stay in the sport? Do they get better each year? That's coaching. Anyone can take a super talent and have them great for a year or two, and then they're injured and out of the sport. Sorry for the rant. Program management. So what do you use for monitoring systems and methodology? How do you monitor what's going on in the program? Debriefs. So this comes from military. So after each practice, each microcycle, mesocycle, macro, what do you have in your debrief? If you're interested in debriefs and stuff, email me. Anders has it. I can send you a lot of information. So it could be formal. After practice, how'd you feel? What hurts? What did you think about this? About these results? So that's informal. At the end of the week, maybe you send an email with designed questions. At the end of the cycle, maybe it's a little more complex. If you're not debriefing not only the athlete, but the team around the athlete, then how do you know what's really going on? So I encourage people to learn about debrief and debrief process. And these outside audits and internal evaluations, peer review, are critical. So I work at a company in Phoenix called Altus, and we have coaches come in from all over the world for various stints of time, and they serve as our auditing agency. The questions they ask, the feedback they give them, and we send them formal audits. So my question for you is, who audits you? How often? And what